finance, housing, economic, and community development. He holds a bachelor's degree in environmental planning from University of California, Santa Cruz.
right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Operations and Public Safety Committee meeting. As you recall, we have gone back to our committee format. So for this particular meeting, we will meet on the first and third Tuesday of every month, and you will see all 7 of us participating in this committee. Kim, will you start off with the roll call, please?
Thank you. Council President Troutner.
Here.
Councilmember Boyce.
Here.
Councilmember Fincher. Councilmember Kaur. Councilmember Larmer.
Here.
Councilmember Michaud. Here. Councilmember Thomas.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. So moving on in the agenda, up next we have the agenda approval. Are there any changes from council or staff?
No changes from staff this afternoon.
All right, thank you, Derek. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
If no changes, then I move to accept the agenda as written.
Second. All right, so I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, the agenda is approved. Moving on to the business of this committee, and the first item that we have is payment of bills, and that is information that comes to council through email. So are there any questions or comments? All right, may I have a motion, please?
All right. Madam Chair, I move to authorize the payment of bills. Second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor of approving the payment of bills say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we will move on to our first information-only item, which is our second quarter 2021 investment report, and I'd like to welcome Jay Bartlemay.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm Joe Bartlemay. I'm the Cash and Investment Officer for our Finance Department. And today I'm presenting investment reports for the second quarter of 2021. And this was presented to our Investment Advisory Board on August 26th. So as of the June 30th, 2021, we had cash balance in the bank of $14.8 million, Washington State investment pool balance of $94 million plus, and our managed investment portfolio with PFM at $169 million with a market value of almost $171 million. That strong market value that you're seeing there is the value of our portfolio, if we were to have liquidated it at June 30th. So the strong value is a good representation of the high quality of the portfolio that we have with PFM. The yields, cash in the bank is 0.70%. That's an earnings credit that helps offset our fees with U.S. Bank. Rather than earning an interest payment, we receive a credit towards our banking fees. The state investment pool is 0.075. That's an overnight rate. Basically, it's a very liquid portfolio. We can move money anytime, any day we can move money in or out. And then that managed portfolio with PFM is a much more robust yield at 1.1% for this current market. And the average liquidity of 939 days, just under 3 years. And Kim, if I could have you go back just a second. There you go. In the pie chart below, you can see the red is the Washington State investment pool. That represents nearly a third of our portfolio at this time. The green is the U.S. Treasuries. That's about another third of our portfolio. And cash and other investment types make up the remaining third. Thank you. So here we have a 5-quarter comparison of cash investments and state investment pool. So you can compare the second quarter of 2020 on your left, flowing forward to the second quarter of 2021 on the right. Cash is the green bar at the bottom, the green line. We maintain cash needed for daily cash flows, and that helps offset our U.S. Bank fees. That pinkish purple line there is the state investment pool. with the orange line above it is the PFM portfolio. And as you can see, so far over the year, we've moved a significant portion of our portfolio from that overnight liquid portfolio to the PFM managed portfolio to take advantage of the higher yield opportunities. And then total cash and investments at the top, you can see comparison year over year, the increase. Here we have the 3-year comparison of cash flows with 2019 in the dark line at the bottom. The pink line is 2020, and that red line at the top is 2021. So you'll notice the cash flows from year to year are fairly consistent, increasing year over year. And then in June of 2021, you'll notice a sharp increase in total portfolio size. This is cash investment and all state investment pool. We received $14.1 million in the ARPA funding in June. So that's one-time money that we received that increased our portfolio size, as well as we received $3.6 million of the streamlined sales tax mitigation, and that's from the prior fiscal year from July 1, 2020 to June 30th, 2021. We received that at the end of June. Again, a one-time large revenue. Here we have interest earnings, a 5-month comparison again. So the first quarter or the second quarter of 2020 is on your left, flowing forward to the current quarter on the right. The blue bar on the left is general fund only, and the lighter blue is all other funds combined. So you can see the total earnings trending down with the current market. The rates are just very low. Anything new we purchase is at relatively low rates, and our larger earning investments are maturing, so anything we reinvest is at a lower rate. Here we have, of that $277 million total portfolio, this represents each fund's portion of that portfolio as of June 30th. So you can see a significant portion, that almost $47 million in the general fund at June 30th. The streamlined sales tax mitigation is in the 1500 fund, the Capital Resources Fund, which has a large portion of the portfolio right now. And the ARPA funding is in the other operating projects fund, the 1900 fund. That 14 million there is the majority of that fund. See other significant portions in the various capital project funds and utility funds and insurance funds. Here we have just our managed portfolio. This is excludes the cash and our state investment pool. And if I could draw your attention down to the left, you can see our laddered maturities in our portfolio. A significant portion in the 1 to 2 year. I looked forward to the current month. I just received August statement today, and you'll see the maturities out a little further. The 1 to 2 is down a little bit, and the more maturities to take advantage of the longer, the higher interest earnings on the longer yields. And then last, we have the portfolio compliance report. This is provided by our investment advisors at PFM. And on the left, you can see the various security type, the balance at the end of the second quarter, the percentage of the portfolio that investment type owns, and then in the middle is the allowable percentage that we can have in each of those investment types. Treasuries, we could have 100% of our portfolio if we chose. Same with government agencies. Cash, we can have 100%, LGIP. So we're well within our tolerance of all the investment types. And on the right, you can see the prior month's balance, or the prior quarter's balance, sorry. And just one thing to point out on our report, there was, at the end of the second quarter, there was one large investment that we had purchased that was supposed to settle on June 30th, and it actually settled in the 1st of July. So the total of the portfolio is the same as you saw on the first page, but the allocation is slightly different. The bank deposit on our reports, we had cash in the bank of the larger amount. It was $14 million plus. And then we had less in the U.S. Treasuries. That is all I have for you. Do I have any questions?
Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment. Really, I have the opportunity to represent the council on the quarterly meetings, and I just want to say kudos, to Joe, working close with Molly. They do a phenomenal job, really, just watching the fund and making sure we're doing the right thing and protecting the city fund. So I just want to say kudos to you guys, and I continue to learn a lot from you, and I think we all up here can feel safe that Joe don't want to wear orange, right? So he wanted to make sure that he taking care of fun. But really, just kudos to you guys. You're doing a good job, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyce. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Moving on, we are going to welcome Pat Fitzpatrick to talk about the possession of drug paraphernalia ordinance.
Good evening, Council. Good to see you. I have before you an ordinance amendment, and this is just a housekeeping measure, but I want to go through kind of what we're doing here so you have the background. I think we've talked about it a couple of times at a couple of prior meetings about the Blake decision in Washington, and that is the decision that basically made our state's drug possession statute invalid and unconstitutional. And the reason for that decision was that there was no intent element in that statute. And so for a while, drug possession in the state of Washington there was no law pertaining to that. In the legislative session this year, the House passed House Bill 5476, and that fixed the issue that was in Blake. And in that bill, the legislature added the element, the intent element of knowing. In the Blake case, the defendant argued that she was unaware that she had drugs in the pants because the pants were borrowed, and that was the basis of her challenge. She was convicted because the statute didn't require her to know that there were drugs in her pants, and our Supreme Court said that's an unconstitutional statute because there's no element. It's a strict liability offense, and those are disfavored under the law, in criminal law. So the legislature added the element of knowing. So now in order to charge somebody with possession of drugs, they have to know that they're possessing the drugs. Mm-hmm. So it's a really small number of cases that issue could be alleged, but so anyway, House Bill 5476 fixed that, but it also did a couple other things that we haven't talked about. Actually, I take that back. One of them we have talked about, and I'll talk about that one real quick, but it's not even relevant to this discussion. I'm just giving you some overall information. So the thing we've talked about is the deferral program that statute created. And if you recall, the statute requires an officer to offer deferral to somebody who is found in possession of drugs. And so in our city, we have created a process for that. I want to be clear on what the statute provides, though. It requires officers to offer a deferral of the offense, but it doesn't require the city to set up a system to defer the offense. It's up to the individual to seek out treatment and defer the offense. And so what we develop in the city, and a lot of cities are doing the same thing, is we have a process now. If officers come across somebody in possession of drugs, they offer to the individual to defer the matter. They inform the individual that they can defer the matter, and the police department will not charge the offense. And the police department and the prosecutor, they will not charge the offense. Officers have a form they fill out, and if the person wants to defer, they will check the box, and they will hand the form to an individual, and it contains a list of all the places the person could go for treatment. And then we take an additional copy of that, and it goes into police records. And records holds that document. It's the same type of thing we use for criminal trespass charges. If an individual is trespassed from private property, the form is filled out and it's held in records. So if a person is again found at that property, the police department can call records, they check the forms, and they confirm whether they've been trespassed. Same system applies to drug possession offenses. If the individual refuses to defer the matter, the officer can charge the individual with an offense. They don't have to, but it's up to the officer's discretion. So that's the system we have. And then the other thing is they're entitled to 2 deferrals under the statute. So if an individual agrees that they want to defer 2 offenses in Kent, those forms, 2 forms would be in Kent records. And on a 3rd offense, an officer could call records and find out if they deferred any offenses. And then if they had 2 prior deferrals, an officer would have discretion to initiate criminal charges. One quick point, in our city, officers do not charge directly into court. They come to my office first. So we also review the case, and we have our own discretion as to whether or not to file charges. If I'm not mistaken, we haven't seen any of these yet in KPD. We certainly haven't seen any in our office. We have not filed a possession charge in quite a while. So backing up to this legislation, whether or not it's a good idea is one issue, but there really is no deferral system in the state of Washington right now. It doesn't exist. So this statute came, in my opinion, it came a little too soon, or it should have been supported by other legislative intent or funding, because the systems are out there. It's totally up to the individual to defer their offense. It's their responsibility. So we do have a system in place. Other agencies have followed what I think is our lead on this, and they're doing the same thing. But I don't think we've had any situations yet where we have, I don't know if we have any deferrals on file in our police department yet, and we certainly haven't filed any cases yet. So that's the second part of Blake. And then there's a third part of Blake that we have not talked about that we're going to talk about tonight. And the third part is regarding drug paraphernalia. The other main thing Blake did was, under state law before, I'm sorry, not Blake, but the other thing that House Bill 5476 did, under state law before this, this legislation, it was illegal for a person, so bear with me on all this, to use any paraphernalia. And paraphernalia was defined as items used to plant, propagate, cultivate, grow, harvest, manufacture, compound, convert, produce, process, prepare, test, analyze, pack, repack, store drugs. Okay. The other things that was also paraphernalia was contain, things to contain, conceal, inject, ingest, inhale, or otherwise introduce into the human body a controlled substance. What the House bill did was it took away all the paraphernalia that would be used to ingest drugs, and it decriminalized that. So now under state law, for example, under state law before the House bill, it would be illegal to possess a syringe that you use to introduce drugs into your system. Now, post legislation, it is not illegal in the state of Washington to do that. It's not illegal to have a crack pipe. All those things are now legal to possess. Okay, so that's another thing that the House bill did. And to be clear, anybody who has items that are used to sell drugs or produce drugs, that is still illegal. Okay, but anything to introduce it in the body or use it as an individual is not illegal in the state of Washington. So this created a little bit of an issue with our criminal code, because under our criminal code in our city, we had an individual drug paraphernalia statute that we have charged under for decades, since I've been here for 25 plus years. So under state law, under the State's Controlled Substances Act, nothing in our city code can create a higher penalty or be in conflict with the state code. And so we have to essentially get rid of our local code regarding drug paraphernalia. The good news is we had 2 codes. We adopted the state code and we had our own code, and we would charge under our own code. We've just always done that. So what we're coming to you tonight to do is get rid of our local code. Our officers can still charge drug paraphernalia offenses under the state code. Nothing has changed, because when we adopt a state statute, if the state amends it, our statutes automatically amends ours as well. One curious thing to know is that A person with drug paraphernalia is not entitled to the deferral process that the House bill made. So I was trying to anticipate a question. So somebody could be stopped or arrested for having stuff to produce methamphetamine. They're not going to get a deferral. It's going to be a criminal charge. So that's my very long-winded explanation of a simple housekeeping measure to get rid of a local code that we already have in state law. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Actually, you do a very good job of explaining things so that we can understand it. So I'm going to start with Councilmember Larmer.
Yeah, so quick clarifying statement, make sure I'm accurate here. So we're actually getting rid of the existing ordinance entirely. We're not rewriting it because we don't need to, they'll prosecute then under the state.
Exactly.
Okay,
correct.
Just want to make sure it's super clear. Thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Boyce.
Yes, not a clarification. So when you say if I have 2 deferred cases in Kent,
Right.
if I have them in Seattle
Okay,
or Auburn,
so,
how did that work?
So that's a challenge because every police agency, not every, there are probably about 5 different records systems that police agencies use. And we all in South King County don't use the same one.
Okay.
So ours doesn't speak to Federal Ways, and it doesn't speak to Renton's, and it doesn't speak to Seattle's. So theoretically, you could get on the phone and call Auburn to say, hey, have you guys ever dealt with this person? Have you given that person a deferral? But I think that's just not, that process probably isn't going to happen. There's, when you have 5 or 6 calls pending in the line, it's a lot of work for an officer to do on the spot, on the street, when they're trying to deal with the situation. So it's highly unlikely that, theoretically, let me just put it this way, a person could get 2 deferrals in Auburn and 2 in Kent and 2 in Federal Way and 2 in Seattle and 2 in Tukwila. It could happen. There's just really there was no process put together for this kind of thing when they passed the statute.
And that's another clarifying question. I don't know the answer to this here. So based on all the new rules, can you walk down the street, smoke pot legally?
Can you, well, no, because under the marijuana statute, you're not supposed to use marijuana in the view of the public, so that's the first thing. So theoretically, no. You wouldn't be charged with the paraphernalia side of it. Number 2, you could have authority to possess the marijuana. It could be deemed not illegal under state law. So potentially, yes.
So I would imagine police probably not going to see somebody walking down the street. They probably wouldn't stop that person, would
I'm
they?
going to defer that to a guy in a uniform in the back of the house here.
Okay. Let's see here. And while he's coming up, so if I got a pipe in my pocket, I mean, that's okay, right?
Personal use.
Personal use.
Yep.
Okay. Wow.
Personal, introducing something into the body, that is not illegal in the state of Washington.
But if I sit on my front porch on my own property, that's okay.
Yep.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand. All right.
Yep.
Okay. Chief is up.
Sorry.
I thought Pat did an excellent job answering that question.
This
Oh,
is
there's
a
anything else?
clarification, that's all.
What was the question again, Councilmember?
And if I walk down the street smoking pot, what do you guys do?
So like Pat said, it's illegal to consume in public,
Right.
right? It's supposed to be in private only. The challenge comes in is with the deferral, and I'll give you a for instance. I went out on patrol, because with our staffing shortages, which we'll talk about at another time, I've mandated all of my command staff to actually go out and take beats and take calls. It's very unprecedented, but it's all hands right now. On that patrol, I will tell you, down at the 7-Eleven on Willis, came upon a male behind a utility box smoking from a rather large meth pipe. I hadn't seen a meth pipe in a long time, but it was a meth pipe.
Mm-hmm.
Contacted him, I'm in uniform, and I said, hey, I want to talk to you. He looks at me, he puts his meth pipe in his pocket, and he starts to walk away. And I say, hey, sir, I need to talk to you, I need to get your name. And he looks at me and shakes his head and he walks away. So now I'm in a position where I cannot book this person in jail. The law is very clearly designed so that we get referrals, not prosecution and arrest. And I have to make a choice as a law enforcement officer. Am I going to use force to detain this person, right, under this huge umbrella of everything that says the system saying we don't want you to take physical action in these cases?
Right.
And so the outcome of that was I let that gentleman walk away. because I was going to force a physical confrontation to keep him. That's where the practicality of the law comes in that's hard to get around. So we're working through that.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll be a little more successful in getting people to cooperate. We can do some referrals. I checked with our records department this afternoon, and we don't have any that we can see since we started doing this on July 25th.
And one follow-up, man. Just so you didn't do anything. This guy get in his car, cause a major accident. Then what?
Yeah, I did not watch him in the car, and to that point, that would be a threshold for me, right? At that point, now the risk to the community triggers me to say now it's more justifiable to use force, and I would obviously do that. Okay. This person was on foot and just didn't want to talk to me.
Good. All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Councilmember Fincher, did you have a question?
Yeah, the second part of Councilmember Boyce's question took care of mine. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Pat? All right, so Councilmember Thomas, do you have a motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do. I would move to adopt ordinance number 4412, repealing sections 9.02.850 of the Kent City Code to ensure the city's code provisions and enforcement of drug paraphernalia laws are consistent with new state legislation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes 7-0. We will move on to the last item on our agenda today, and that is information only. It's an update on the race and equity things that we talked about before. Uriel, Varela is here, and then also I believe Merina Hanson will be joining us.
Well,
so
good
thank
afternoon.
you.
Again, my name is Uriel Varela. Thank you, Council President. Today I'm here with Merina Hanson to provide additional context and updates on some of the questions that we received during our last update. So the focus is going to be on equitable engagement. So that was brought up during our last update by the consultant, as well as funding. So Merina will handle the funding questions and presentations, and I'll be going briefly over the equitable engagement and what that means for the city of Kent. Before I go on to that, I just want to share again that this is a timeline for the strategic plan. We've increased the phase of engagement to the end of October. The same thing had to happen with the research findings and data analysis. So that we have 2 more listening sessions remaining for this month, and we will be receiving the reports and summary of the engagement data on September 22nd. After we receive the data, we will be looking and analyzing the data with the core team to settle on the areas of focus for the strategic plan. So on top of the pandemic and the socioeconomic effects of the pandemic, one of the things that we've had to deal with when it comes to engagement is historical harm, and this was brought up by the consultant last week. When we talk about historical harm, we typically associate that with history, right? So what are the systems of marginalization that have contributed to the disproportionality that exists today when it comes to life outcomes for people? That is not what she was referring to specifically during the last conversation. That is part of the accountability that we have to be able to talk about, the harms that have been done historically. But the reference to last week's presentation had to do with community engagement. And for the purpose of kind of sharing an idea of what that looks like, and I'm going to share a regional example without mentioning names. So you can see how something is insignificant can become significant. So this specific project started when I started here at the City of Kent. The project, this was a regional agency that came to the city, and we were going to address an equity issue here at the City of Kent. So we put together a really good stakeholder team with community-based organizations, businesses, as well as residents who are going to provide some of that information as well as decision-making in the process to address this systemic issue. So after about a year of meeting, we settled on solutions for this specific issue. The regional organization left and kind of worked on implementation and what that would look like. But for 2 years, we heard nothing from them. So community members and stakeholders were asking us, what happened to this this project? Because it was a plan. What happened to this project? These stakeholders invested their time over a year as well as their expertise over a year and had nothing to share with community members. So that is the lack of communication over those 2 years created a significant rift in a lot of these communities because they were saying, we contributed to this plan or this pilot project and nothing really happened. So that is the harm that was meant when we talked about harm. That is one of the harms that is meant. This is a contemporary harm that doesn't just apply to the city of Kent. It happens all over the place with governments all over the place. In academia, it happens often. In for-profit corporations, it happens often with the communication ends after we collect the data. And that is something that we do need to address because this is not something that's just for the city of Kent. We have to be accountable with our partners as well to make sure that we have equitable community engagement when we do these types of programs. So we are committed to conducting equitable and accountable community engagement. And moving forward, what does that mean and what does that look like? So we will continue to provide opportunities for community input and co-designing opportunities, not just for this strategic plan, but for in the future for other programs. And the engagement phase doesn't end with the creation of a de-implementation plan, of course. We need to be going back to communities and making sure that what we're doing is actually working. And one of the ways that we can address this specific issue is by creating multiple engagement mechanisms. So someone might want to provide some input through a survey. Someone else might want to be part of the co-designing process of whatever the program is. So multiple opportunities to engage is what the focus will be. We also have to create an engagement framework to make sure that everything is standardized when it comes to community engagement and the way we do it here at the city. So the spectrum of community engagement is a navigation tool that was created by the Movement Strategy Center. There's another spectrum of engagement by the International Association for Public Administration that's very similar in the way that they conduct engagement. So this is a very simplified version of this spectrum of engagement, and this is what we're going to be using as we move forward when it comes to community engagement. So this provides an opportunity for cities or any organization that's doing engagement to kind of do a self-analysis of where they lie when it comes to community engagement. I think we all have our own ideas of where we lie when it comes to the city of Kent, but just based on my analysis of the work that I've been involved in and other work in the city, we lie somewhere between involve and collaborate. So in the past, before informing, it was marginalization. So it goes to informing, consulting, involving, collaborating, and defer to. So we are currently somewhere between involving and collaborating, and we want to move forward with that. What that means is that the engagement process needs to be formulated and standardized, and that's going to be part of the strategic plan, creating that standard form of engagement to make sure that when we go out to the communities and we ask for data or we ask for co-designing, that the relationships are there, and that we're accountable when it comes to informing our communities in every step of the process. Any questions about that piece?
Councilmember Larmer.
Yeah, so I would just really want to thank you for this update in the context, because I think it does help explain kind of what we heard and where some of the feelings in the community were coming from. And I think you hit on a key fact, and I do see it in private sector as well, that we get the data, we issue a report, and then we're done. We don't communicate beyond that with those that helped us inform that decision or put together that report. So I think that's a really good point to formalize and use some sort of framework so that we know every time that we are following up and just tying up those loose ends after the fact in the same way, in the same respectful fashion. So
right.
Thank you for that.
And the framework will be, in this case, the spectrum of community engagement. It's much more complicated than this graph or this example, but it'll provide us with the actual steps to take and make sure that we're going back to the community and not just listening, but providing an opportunity for also co-designing.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are no more questions, and I'll hand it off to Merina.
All right, thank you for letting us jump in on this presentation tonight to add some clarity around the funding allocations that we make in human services. I know several of you had some follow-up questions after last week, so we just wanted to touch base with you tonight and kind of share some background there. The next two slides are both slides you've actually seen before. I just wanted to kind of touch back on our foundational equity work that we have been engaging in human services for the last 10 plus years. So I won't read every initiative or project that we've been involved in, but the Kent Cultural Diversity Initiative Group, KCDIG, has been growing strong for 12 plus years now. Our city staff in human services has been involved in some very key projects, both locally and regionally, including the King County Immigrant and Refugee Task Force, Governing for Racial Equity and Inclusion, and the GARE program. This slide is a little bit more focused on our actual application process itself and some of the trainings that we've actually already talked with you about over the past year that we had with our commissioners and our staff as we engaged in our last application process. So we had a few different consultants come in and do some trainings with us around grant making with an equity lens and implicit bias. And using some of that engagement with our consultants, we did make some adjustments to our application process as we went. And then we did once that process was complete, we engaged another consultant to do an equity analysis on the entire application process itself. So from application all the way through to funding. And that was just something that we decided internally that was really important for us to do. We wanted to make sure that the work we'd done with the consultants and our commission was really making a difference. And we continue to meet with leadership in our underserved communities to kind of continue that work. I'm going to jump in with the help of Kim now just to our allocation spreadsheet. And unfortunately, I couldn't get this to you all in time because of the quickness of having to get this together. But we did conduct an analysis of our funding. Let me see here. So if you can pull it over to the left a little bit.
Real quick, I'm sorry. Can we make that bigger? Because it's like an eye chart.
There you go. Well, I don't have it, and we will send it to you. But
that's good. She can make it
basically our
bigger.
agencies, the programs that we fund, the funding source, how much they are receiving. That column H is where their administrative offices are. So that wasn't something that we could go off of in determining whether it's a Kent program or not. So what we did over on the right, and I've actually got some columns hidden so that you can see it, but we went through program by program and determined whether or not it was a Kent-based agency or if it was an agency that has a Kent office, whether it's a program that is specific to Kent, so it might be offered at the school district or something like that. And then we also looked at whether, it was a South King County program, perhaps, and then there are a few that are outside of South King County, but very few. There are a few that are county-wide programs that really are the only game in town, and they're kind of unique. So we did that, and then we went through and were able to utilize some magical formulas, thanks to my administrative staff, that were able to come up with some funding amounts and percentages that I can show you back in the PowerPoint. And then I can pull this back up if you guys have questions specific to that, but let's see. Oh yeah, they are down if you just want to scroll down, or otherwise we can just jump back to the PowerPoint, whatever's easier. A little bit further and then scroll a little bit further down. Sorry, there we go. So you can see the totals there, and you'll note that somewhere in the neighborhood of 80% of our funding goes directly to agencies that are based in Kent, or programs that are based in Kent. And then there's roughly 12% that is more South King County based. And part of that right now is honestly due to the fact that CCS, which has the home program, our rotating men's shelter, normally that would have been listed as a Kent program, but those individuals are now being served in CTAC. So that shifted over. And then there are a few programs that are virtual and remote only right now. And then we have a few that are offered in another King County city. Really, I think that one is the Bridge Disability Ministries program, which provides medical equipment to low-income residents. So it's an unusual one. And you will note that we really do have literally zero programs that are based solely in Seattle. Our residents do not have to travel to Seattle to receive services. The difference that you'll note in the program years there is really down to the CDBG CV funds that are listed in 2021, but not in 2022. So hopefully that will provide a little bit of clarity about where the funds are, and I'm going to add some additional context to how we get there. If you can help me get back to the PowerPoint.
Before you go,
Councilmember Boyce has a question.
okay.
Sure.
So remote, could you explain what that means?
So there are a few, primarily those are our organizations that we fund to provide capacity building to our other nonprofit organizations. So we fund Communities Rise and, where is it? I have to find it. It's escaping me at the moment, but we fund two organizations to help, Seattle Foundation, Neighbor to Neighbor, sorry, to help our organizations build capacity. And so they were, prior to COVID, having workshops in Kent, and they were traveling here to help, but right now it's all being handled virtually. And then we also have Solid Ground, which is a Seattle-based organization helping us with some of our CDBG CV rent assistance funds, and they are offering those appointments virtually with Kent residents.
Okay.
Okay. So we can actually go one more ahead. I'll do it, sorry. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that you all understand that as part of our allocation process, our Human Services Commissioners discuss program location as part of the review process. So that is something that's on our review sheet. It's something we talk a lot about. We always give priority to Kent-based organizations whenever possible. I touched a little bit on some of those countywide organizations or those that provide a unique service. So just for your reference, that would include organizations like Crisis Clinic, which operates the crisis line countywide, Child Care Resources, and King County Sexual Assault Resource Center, sorry. And then another point of clarification is that 100% of our funds actually go to Kent residents. So I think there was a little bit of confusion around that, because even though we might serve or fund an organization that's located outside of Kent, we are explicitly funding them to provide services to Kent residents. And the way that we're able to monitor that is, of course, we fund by reimbursement only. So we don't disperse any funds until we receive the billing voucher and that service report. And then additionally, just for control purposes, to make sure that our agencies are accurate, we do monitoring and audits on a fairly regular basis, and we do that with our partners in the other cities. So part of that process does include looking at record keeping and as well as talking with those agencies about how they are determining residency. And then in addition to program location, our commissioners also are looking at whether or not agencies have strong relationships locally. Do they have partnerships and collaborations already in place? It's not really unusual, if you think about it, that some of these Seattle-based organizations have started to apply to us for funding. They've all seen their client base shift south over years and years. And so they do now seek funding from us more often than they used to, and sometimes that does involve opening satellite offices, but they don't typically get super far in our funding process just because our resources are finite. We know who's here, we know who's doing the work, and that's where we really focus. And then I would just also, kind of as an overarching piece, mention that while it might be nice, we know that we're not ever going to have a fully contained human services support system in each and every city. It's just simply too expensive. If you consider rent and overhead and administrative costs, we're really lucky in Kent. a lot of these organizations have chosen to locate here. So I think some of our South King County neighboring jurisdictions sometimes are a little envious of that because our residents don't typically have to travel far for services, but just wanted to mention that. All that said, we definitely know that all of this work is definitely something that's a work in progress. So just this slide really kind of wants to give you some additional information about where we're at and kind of where we're going. So we did conduct our equitable grant making analysis with a consultant this year. So you'll be hearing more about that soon. And one of the things that we learned through that process is that there are barriers and there are perceived barriers. And perceived barriers are still a problem. And a lot of what happens in our instance is just a lack of communication or a lack of understanding, or the information is too hard to find. So we've already made quite a few adjustments based on that feedback. We used it in our CDBG CV process. So we offered some enhanced technical assistance, we added tools to our website, and we had an entire workshop focused on reporting. We currently have a workshop scheduled for September 22nd. It's very early because we have an application process that kicks off next year, but this is really going to be designed for those organizations that have not yet applied to any of the cities through that traditional application process. So really geared towards those organizations and trying to help them get a head start. And in June of this year, our Human Services Commission had a meeting that included an open invitation to organizations to join that meeting to talk more with our commissioners and to get to know them and to kind of start improving that communication. We just realized that a lot of our organizations didn't know who the commission was, who they were, and what their role was. We had over 40 people attend that meeting virtually, and there was an interest on both parts of the commission and the organizations to continue doing that on kind of a semi-regular basis. And then lastly, we, in an effort to kind of do better in the communication realm, staff created an eGov distribution that has over 400 email addresses currently listed, and we're going to be sending out our first e-news update later this month that will just really be focused on human services news and updates. And I could go on and on, but I know you all have questions, so either for Uri or me, and so I'm happy to answer those.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, and thank you, Uri, for coming back and answering all of our questions following the discussion last week. Really appreciate it, and I think this has been helpful. We have about 10 minutes, so just kind of want to be mindful of the time because we do have a meeting that comes in right after this. So I will start with Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Merina, thank you. Good job as usual. I think we all a little flushed about, at least the perception that the funding was not all coming to Kent. That's clearly not the answer. So we as council members, we are clear on that. How do we go about with the community? Because what I heard, there was people in the community saying that the money was not coming to Kent. And I think the data here proved differently, right? And we need to figure out how we can, because if it's coming to Kent and benefiting Kent, that's all I really care about, right? For us, who doing who, what, when, where, it doesn't really matter, right? We helping the citizen of Kent. So my question to you and Uriel, how do we go back to let people know the funding is coming to Kent and staying in Kent? And going forward, we need to make sure that's be a centerpiece of our conversation before we get started.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great comment. And again, I think it goes back to that perception piece, and we just need to do a better job of educating the community about what we do, communicating in general and not just in the traditional formats. We're doing a lot of learning about ways that our communities receive information, and so using every avenue that we possibly can to make sure that we're letting people know what services are out there that could benefit them, but also just general information so they better understand our funding and what it does. So things like the e-news, we're actually already mid-redesign on our webpage, better utilizing social media, getting creative, basically. And there's a lot of strategies that we have, and some of those you'll hear more about that we're recommended by our equity consultant in terms of communication. There's quite a few there, but I didn't want to go too deep into that tonight just because we're not quite ready for that. And even though it would be really relevant, we'll come back to you for more with that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you, Council President. So could we go back one slide? Great. So on, oh, no. Yeah, okay. So on the second bullet point, how are you identifying the organizations to communicate to about the September 22nd? I mean, if they've not been through our application process before, how are we aware of them, and how are we ensuring that we know of all of them that we want to communicate to?
So I'm actually Lori was part of the team that has put together this workshop, and it's not simply a Kent workshop. It's going to be part of, we're part of that 17, 18 cities. So I'm going to let her jump in and share a little bit about that.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Good evening. Thank you. Thanks for the question. So we have relationships with a lot of organizations that are here in Kent. We'll also use networks like the Neighbor to Neighbor. So the staff, Eileen Balaharia, they primarily fund organizations with budgets under $250,000, which is typically not the kind of organization that we might see an application from. So we use a lot of our networks. Other funders, who else? We look at lists of who other people are funding. And through Casey Dig is probably one of our best ways to advertise funding. So it's really through our networks that we have created. And we will do it in person, phone call, email, in newsletters, again, multiple ways. The one thing we are struggling with right now, and we haven't answered yet, is whether or not we'll be offering that session in other languages. So we're gonna look to see who, we put a blurb in the invitation about if you need other accommodations or assistance to let us know. So we'll address the other language should it come up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that question. Before I could ask it too about the languages. So I like that you guys are doing the technical assistance, that you have, you're going over the application process, you have the entire workshop. Now, does part of the process also include going over the application process after everything is done, after the grants have been divvied out, and going back to the people who applied, whether they were a grantee or whether they didn't qualify, to ask them what about the process, how it worked for them?
That was something that we did have our consultants who did our grant making analysis ask. So they engaged with organizations that had applied to funding, who had not applied to funding, who had received funding, who had not received funding. They very specifically reached out to organizations that covered all of those categories, because we wanted to make sure that we were hearing from each of those groups. So we always offer follow-up and feedback if organizations want to connect with us, but in the past it hasn't been something that we specifically reached out to each and every organization. Of course, every organization gets a letter, and that does direct them to staff if they have questions. One of the things that I know those involved in the application process are focusing on for next year are things like being very straightforward on more easily accessible information, including an application that is considered really well written and successful in funding, so that people have a template that they can see. You mentioned technical assistance. That's not just us anymore, because for some people that's intimidating to come to those who they perceive to be in control of these funds, but engaging some of those organizations that are not government, who can help them do technical assistance. We've talked about doing more kind of peer-to-peer technical assistance, so that people can work with other organizations who have successfully received funds, again, to kind of take out that intimidating factor that might be present if they're trying to get assistance from us. We do have a lot of organizations that are totally happy coming to our staff, and we work really closely with them, but we just wanted to make sure to make it as readily available as possible.
Good move. And then how often are you are the reports submitted? Is this a monthly thing that the organizations are submitting reports for the CDBG? Is it quarterly? Is it yearly?
Yeah. So the general fund and the general fund reports are quarterly. So we pay out on a quarterly basis. There are a few programs that do report to us monthly. Those tend to be the large, like rent assistance ones, just because it's that reimbursement process. So we don't want to make, they spend a lot of money every month. So we want to make sure that we're keeping them whole so they're not that far in the hole.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. All right, and Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. I'll keep it super short. Merina and team, thanks so much for being here and presenting all this information and taking the time to create that Excel sheet for us. I really appreciate it. And once again, I say it a lot, but I'm really proud of the work that we are doing on the Human Services Commission with this grant, equitable grant process. So thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for being a participant in it. You've been a really supportive council member to have as part of that process and have a lot to offer. So thank you.
All right, wonderful. Thank you for joining us and for answering all our questions.
Thanks.
Appreciate
and I will
it.
get that spreadsheet to you guys, so if you want to look at it a little closer.
Okay, wonderful. That brings us to the end of our Operations and Public Safety Committee meeting. We will adjourn and then be back shortly for workshops. So thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.